You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself to the jury, spelling your last name for the record?
Maureen Hartnett. The last name is Hartnett.
Where are you currently employed?
I am a forensic scientist, too, at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory in the Criminalistics Unit.
How long have you been with the Massachusetts State Police?
I was originally hired in 2004, and I worked from 2004 to 2007 in both the CODIS unit and the Criminalistics Unit, and then I was most recently hired again in 2019 into the Criminalistics Unit.
And how long have you been a forensic scientist 2 for?
Approximately 4.5 years.
How long were you a forensic scientist 1 for?
Approximately 9 months.
Okay. And your title is what's your title?
Forensic scientist, too.
Okay. And what are your duties and responsibilities as a forensic scientist in the Criminalistics Unit?
I examine various items of evidence submitted by law enforcement agencies as well as internal crime scene responders for the presence of body fluids such as blood, semen, and saliva. I also do trace identification and damage analysis.
Okay. And what training did you receive at the lab?
I received approximately 9 months of training that was broken up into modules, each module addressing a different type of analysis that we would do in the unit. At the end of each module, I took a written exam, an oral exam, and a hands-on practical exam. Once I completed all the modules, I was given a mock case to process as normal casework.
Okay. And what is your educational background?
I have a bachelor's degree in biology from Bridgewater State University and a master's degree in forensic science from the University of New Haven.
And outside of your formal education, what training have you received in the field of criminalistics?
In addition to the training, which I just spoke about, the 9-month training in-house at the State Police Crime Laboratory, I also received a 40-hour blood stain pattern analysis class. I took an ethics workshop and also a workshop on cognitive bias.
And what, if any, continuing education do you do? Excuse me.
As part of our accreditation, we are required to do continuing education every year, which may consist of learning a new technique or reading various articles in the field of forensics.
And who is the lab accredited by?
Our lab is accredited by ANSI, National Accreditation Board.
Okay. And you participated in competency and proficiency tests?
Yes, I do.
Most recently, what was the result of your rounds of competency testing, excuse me?
Successfully completed my most recent rounds of proficiency testing.
Okay. Now, you indicated that you're part of the crime response team.
Yes, I'm also a member of the crime scene response unit.
And how long have you been part of that?
Upon hire in 2019.
Okay. How many crime scenes have you responded to?
I would say approximately 200.
And when you respond to crime scenes, what's your usual role, typical role?
When I respond to crime scenes, I'll test various items of evidence. Again, for body fluids, I will collect various items, including weapons, clothing, and any other items that may contain forensic value.
And how many criminalistic cases have you been assigned or participated in, ma'am?
I believe approximately 1,000.
How are cases assigned to you?
Cases are assigned to me through my supervisor.
Okay. And once a case is assigned to you, what do you do?
Once a case is assigned to me, I will read over any reports that come along with the case, including police reports, medical examiner reports, crime scene reports if those have been written, and then I decide what items are potentially most forensically relevant to examine.
Okay. Now, once you make that determination, what's the next step you do?
The next step is I prepare my lab area for examining the evidence. I bleach down my bench top with a 10% bleach solution, in addition to any reusable utensils that I'll use, and I also have various disposable utensils that I will prepare for examining the evidence.
And what's the purpose of that?
To prevent contamination.
Now, what steps do you take in processing an item of evidence?
So once my bench area is ready and I'm put on my appropriate lab coat, gloves, and mask, I will retrieve the item of evidence from our cold storage unit. We have a computer electronic tracking system for every item of evidence within the lab. So once I put that evidence into my custody, I will scan it using the barcode on the package and scan it against the barcode that I have been assigned, so that the computer system is aware that I now have custody of that item.
Now, once that is completed, what do you do next? I
photograph all the packaging to ensure that it was properly sealed. I then will photograph each item of evidence, front, back, interior, and exterior.
And once you complete that, what do you do next?
Depending on what the purpose of the examination is, I'll most likely be looking for any staining on the item, looking for trace materials on the item, and decide what type of testing will be done.
Okay. And what is a screening test?
A screening test is an initial test on a biological fluid. For example, a blood screening test will indicate whether or not blood may be present in that sample. And if there's a positive screening test, I will do a confirmatory test to confirm whether or not that stain is actually blood.
And just very briefly, what does a confirmatory test do?
A confirmatory test will determine whether or not the stain is blood.
And what do you specifically use? What does that look like?
So the screening test, I take something similar to a cotton swab with a Q-tip. I rub it on the stain. I add 2 chemicals to that cotton swab. If it turns pink, it's considered a positive screening test. If the screening test is positive, then I'll then perform a confirmatory test where I either take a swabbing or a cutting from that stain. I put it in a buffer, which is just a liquid, to extract the stain from the item. That liquid is then loaded into a test card. It's something similar to a COVID test if you've done that. So you spot that liquid at the beginning of the card in the well. The liquid would travel up the strip. If it's 2 lines, it's positive. If there's 1 line, it's negative.
So, Ms. Harnett, what happens when it tests positive?
If the confirmatory test is positive, I'll prepare a sample for DNA.
And what happens if it's negative?
Generally, I don't prepare a sample at that point.
So for that particular item, it's concluded?
For that particular stain, there'd be no further testing.
What is QLIM, and what does quantity limited indicate?
QLIM is a term that we use at the lab to indicate that the stain or the item being sent forward to DNA is not large enough to divide into 2 samples. Typically, when we collect a sample, we preserve half of that stain or sample for further testing. If the stain or sample is too small for a variety of reasons, we will then deem it QLIM, which means quantity limited, and that entire sample will be used up during DNA analysis.
And QLIM is QLIM.
Yes, that's correct.
How are samples prepared for further analysis?
Depending on what the substrate the sample is on, if it's fabric or a hard surface, if it's a fabric, I will cut a sample, place it into a plastic tube, and seal it properly to send off to the DNA unit. If it is a hard surface, I will take a swabbing of the stain, preserve it in a similar fashion. I'll put it in a plastic tube, which is then properly sealed and sent forward to DNA.
And how are samples chosen for DNA analysis?
Samples are chosen on what potentially will have the most forensic relevance.
And who chooses? Who makes that decision?
I make that decision.
And once you make that decision, what happens next?
The samples are sent forward to DNA.
Okay. Now, I'd like to direct your attention to this lab number, in this case, lab number 21-02063. What was your role in this matter, Ms. Harnett?
I processed the evidence in the criminalistics unit for this case.
Okay. And do you recall who you received the evidence from?
The clothing items I received from our crime scene responder, Amy Joy, or she submitted them into the laboratory. The two other items, the knives, were submitted by Trooper Thomas Loughran, and he submitted to the crime laboratory.
Now, once these items are submitted to the crime laboratory and you obtain them, what do you do with them first?
First, they will be scanned into my custody so that the laboratory understands that they're in my custody and I have control over them.
Okay. Now, what items did you perform a general test on in this case?
I examined item 1-3, which is a knife, item 1-4, which is a knife. I also examined clothing of Christine Ricci, which consisted of a shirt, a sweatshirt, a pair of shoes, and a pair of pants.
And when you receive those items, are they already labeled? Do you label them? What happens?
They are already labeled upon receipt.
I want to focus on the knife, the first knife, 1-3.
Okay.
When you obtain that item, what did you do with it?
I scanned it into my custody. I photographed the packaging and as well as photographed the item.
Okay. Do you observe the item?
Yes. Once that's completed, I make any visual observations of that item.
And when you made visual observations of this item, 1-3, what did you see?
I saw a red-brown stain on the blade of the knife, and I also saw trace materials in the serrated portion of the knife.
Why don't we do it now? Sure. Can we pause on very briefly?
Yes. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I post a witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Can you do the photographs? Sorry, do you recognize those photographs?
Yes, I do.
What is depicted in those photographs?
These are photographs of item 1-3, which was a steak knife.
And did those photographs actually depict that steak knife 1-3?
Yes.
May I post a witness?
You may.
All of these items into evidence exhibit.
No objection.
All right. We've been going one by one, so I'm actually going to keep that theme going, and we'll mark those as Exhibit 20 and 21.
Thank you.
20 and 21 so marked.
Thank you.
Upon visual inspection of that knife 1-3, what did you see?
I saw red-brown staining on the blade of the knife. I also saw trace materials within the serrated portion of the knife.
Okay. And that trace material, if you can only refer to it as trace material, where was that located on the knife?
It was in the serrated cutting portion of the knife.
May I post a witness, Your Honor?
You may.
And you're not photo. You recognize what is depicted in that photo?
Yes, I do.
What is depicted in that photo?
This is a close-up of a portion of the blade of the knife.
And does that accurately depict the blade of the knife on 1-3?
Yes.
May I post a witness?
Yes.
I will move this item to evidence.
I would ask for my objection to be noted based on the.
Your objection is noted. The close-up of the serrated portion, cutting portion of the knife will be marked as Exhibit 22.
If I may publish number 20 and 21 exhibits to the jury.
Sure.
Sorry, if I may direct your attention to the big screen, exhibit number 20. Can you point out for the jury, if you can see, where the red-brown stain was located?
Do you want me just to get up?
You may get up.
So there was a red-brown staining along the front portion of the blade. I can see it here.
All right, thank you. Now, if I may publish exhibit number 22, Your Honor.
You may.
Ms. Arnett, what is exhibit number 22 display?
This is a close-up of that blade.
And can you point out the red-brown stain that you observed?
Yes. This photo was taken under the microscope, and these are the red-brown stains on the blade of the knife.
And that's at the bottom left of the photograph?
Yes, sir.
Now, after you observed those red-brown stains, what did you do?
I performed a screening test on those red-brown stains, as well as a confirmatory test.
Your Honor, the witness may be seated.
She may be seated.
Now, when you performed the red-brown stains, a screening test of the red-brown stain, what was the result?
The screening test was positive.
And then upon receiving that positive on the screening test of the red-brown stains, what did you do next?
I performed a confirmatory test on those stains.
Okay. And how did you perform a confirmatory test?
I took a swabbing of the stains. I cut a portion of the swab, put it into a tube, added the solution to the tube, which is a liquid buffer, to extract the stain from that swab. And then that liquid is spotted into the test card, as I described earlier, and flowed up the strip of the test card. The resulting card showed 2 lines, which is a positive result.
And did you label that stain? A sample of it, was it labeled?
The sample that I took, yes, was labeled.
And what was that labeled as?
That was labeled, I believe, 1-3.2.1.
Was it labeled also with a letter?
Yes.
What was it called?
I designated it as stain A on the knife.
And that was a knife that was located on the dining room floor
Yes, correct.
of the home.
Yes.
In regards to that item, once the blood confirmatory was confirmed as blood, what did you do with it?
I preserved the sample to send forward the DNA.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else that you did with that item?
I also collected the trace material from the item, and I also took a sample from the handle of the item for possible skid cell recovery.
Okay. And in regards to the skin cell of the item from the handle, what would you do with that?
That sample is sent forward to DNA. I don't do any testing for skin cells. It's just a sample that's taken and sent forward.
All right. Now, I want to discuss with you item 1-4. Okay. What was that item?
Item 1-4 was a chopping knife.
And where was that located?
I believe it was located on the dining room table of the home.
Okay. And when you received that item, what did you do with it?
I scanned it into my custody. I took a photograph of the exterior packaging as well as a photograph of the knife itself.
Okay. And have you had the opportunity to review photographs of that knife?
Yes, I have.
May I post a witness, Your Honor?
You may.
And you 2 photographs. Ms. Arnett, do you recognize what is depicted in those photographs?
Yes, I do.
What is depicted in those photographs?
These are the overall photographs of item 1-4, which is a knife.
Okay. And did those photographs accurately depict item 1-4 that you received in this matter?
Yes.
May I post a witness?
You may. Is there an objection?
No objection to these.
How many are there?
2, Your Honor.
So they'll be marked in a minute as Exhibit 23 and 24.
May I publish Exhibit 24, Your Honor?
You may.
Ms. Arnett, direct your attention to the big screen exhibit number 24. What did you, when you did a visual observation of this knife, what did you see?
Upon my first observation, I noted that there was a dark stain on the tip of the knife.
And when you observed that dark stain on the tip of the knife, what did you do?
I then put it under the microscope so I could get a clearer picture of what it looked like.
And did you take photographs of the tip of the knife with a clearer picture?
Yes, I did.
Okay. I'm going to do both. Thank you. May I post a witness?
You may.
And you 2 more photographs. You recognize what is depicted in those photographs?
Yes, I do.
What is depicted on those photographs?
These are the close-ups of photos taken with the microscope of the blade of that knife and some of the staining on that knife.
May I post a witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Actually, before I do that, did those photographs actually depict the knife that you observed?
Yes, they do.
Or what is depicted on the knife that you had?
Yes, they do.
Renew my objection, Your Honor, for the record.
He's renewing his objection for the record. Note your objection, Exhibits 25 and 26, the close-ups of 1.4, are marked in a minute into evidence.
Your Honor, I have 25 and 26.
You're right.
May I publish exhibit number 25?
You may.
Ms. Arnett, if I can direct your attention to the big screen TV exhibit number 25. If the witness may be removed from the stand to point out.
She may.
You testified there indicated that there was red-brown stains. Can you point to the jury?
Yes. So these are the red brown stains that I observed on the serrated portion of the knife once I looked at it under the microscope.
And once you observed those red-brown stains, what did you do?
Once I observed those red brown stains, I performed a screening test on those.
And what was the result of the screening test?
The screening test was positive.
Please be seated. After you received a positive screening test on that item, what did you do next?
I collected a sample for that item. I did not run a confirmatory test on that particular stain due to the sizing of the stains.
So no confirmatory test was conducted.
Correct.
And how come?
I decided that that stain would most likely be Q-lim, quantity limited, given the small size of the red brown stains. Anytime you perform a test such as a confirmatory test, you are using up some of the sample to do so. So in this case, I chose not to use up that sample for the confirmatory test and send it forward for DNA.
So even though you couldn't do a confirmatory test, you sent it further for additional testing. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct.
And the reason you didn't do that confirmatory test is because it was too small.
Yes, in my opinion, it was too small. It potentially would use up too much of the material in order to run a DNA sample later.
Okay. Now, what else did you do in regards to the item number 1-4?
I also collected the trace material from the blade of the knife, as well as a swab from the handle of the knife for potential skin cell recovery.
Okay. And once you did that, what happened next?
Those samples were properly packaged and sent forward for DNA.
Okay. Now, I want to direct your attention to item 3-10. What's that item?
Item 3-10 was a shirt. It was noted as belonging to Christine Ricci.
And once you received that shirt, what did you do with it?
I photographed the exterior packaging, and then I photographed the item itself, the front, the back, and the interior front and back.
Okay. And after you photographed the T-shirt, what did you do?
I made my visual observations of the shirt, which included a red-brown stain on the front of the shirt.
May I approach?
You may.
I think one photograph. Sorry, do you recognize what is depicted in that photograph?
Yes, I do.
What is depicted in that photograph?
This is a photograph of the front of item 3-10, which is a T-shirt.
Does that photograph accurately depict the front of that 3-10 T-shirt?
Yes, it does.
Okay, post it with us.
You may.
I'll move this to evidence as next exhibit.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
It'll be marked as exhibit, admitted into evidence as exhibit 27, photo of the front of the sweatshirt.
May I publish this to the jury?
You may.
Ms. Harnett, you indicated that you did a visual observation of this T-shirt,
Yes, that's correct.
and what was the result?
I noted a red-brown stain on the front of the T-shirt.
Can you please point to that red-brown stain that you observed?
Yes, may I?
You may.
The red-brown stain is in the upper left area of the T-shirt.
Upper left when you're wearing the T-shirt.
Yes, correct.
In regards to the photograph, it's upper right.
Yes, my apologies. So it's upper right on the photograph. If you were wearing a shirt, it would be the upper left.
Thank you. And you had the opportunity to take additional photographs of that area.
Yes, I did.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
And you took photographs. You recognize what's depicted in those photographs?
Yes, I do.
What? Just,
These are close-up photographs of that stain on the front of the shirt.
does that up-close photograph accurately depict the stain on the T-shirt?
Yes, it does.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
I'll hold these items as evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
They will be marked and admitted into evidence as exhibits 28 and 29.
Exhibits 28 to 29, so marked.
Thank you.
And did you entitle that? What did you do with that stain?
So that stain I screened, excuse me, I performed a screening test for blood on that stain as well as a confirmatory test for blood.
Okay. And that was a sample of stain A.
Yes, correct. I designated it as stain A for reporting purposes.
And what was the result of the blood screening?
The screening test was positive.
And thus you went to the blood confirmatory on this case?
Yes.
On this one?
Excuse me, yes, that's correct.
And what was the result of that?
That test was also positive.
Okay. And once you received the positive on blood confirmatory test, what did you do next?
I took a cutting of that stain to send it forward for DNA.
Okay. What else did you do in regards to item 3-10?
I believe I collected trace materials from that item as well.
Okay. Once your examination of the items was completed, what did you do?
I prepared a technical report of my analysis.
And is that report admin and technically reviewed?
Yes, my report is always technically reviewed by a peer in my unit as well as administratively reviewed.
Okay. May I have a moment, Your Honor?
You may.
So in regards to the trace material, was that submitted for further testing?
No, it was not.
How come?
When a forensic link has been made using a biological fluid, per item, our item analysis policy, trace material is not typically examined unless specifically requested.
Thank you, ma'am. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross-exam.
With regard to the trace materials, you mean specifically requested by like the Commonwealth
It can be requested by the Commonwealth or as well as the defense.
or someone at your lab?
Yes, that's correct. If there's a forensic relevance to that trace material, that would provide an additional answer than has already been provided with the biological.
So in other words, if this material looks like it's going to answer no questions, you don't have it tested.
If it's not going to answer additional questions, correct.
Thank you. None further.
Any redirect?
No, thank you.
The witness may step down.
Thank you.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself to the jury, spelling your last name for the record?
Yes, my name is Megan Little, Little.
And where are you employed, ma'am?
I am employed at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory
How long have you been employed there?
for 5 years.
And what capacity are you employed as?
I am a forensic scientist too in the DNA unit.
And can you briefly describe your educational background?
Yes, I have a bachelor's of science in biochemistry from the University of Maine and a master's of science in forensic science from Marshall University.
And can you just very briefly describe the nature of your work at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab?
Yes, I process evidence samples, analyze results, perform comparisons as necessary, and issue reports.
And do you have any specialized training?
Yes, upon being hired at the crime lab, I underwent a training program that includes processing mock evidence samples, lectures, written exams, and at the completion of that, I took a competency test.
And what was the results of your most recent competency proficiency exams?
I passed all my competency and proficiency tests.
Approximately how many samples have you performed DNA analysis on at the lab?
Over 500.
And can you just very briefly describe the DNA process?
Yes. So we take samples through a 4-step process. The first step is extraction, where we break open the cells and isolate the DNA. The second step is quantification, where we determine how much DNA is present in a sample. The third step is amplification, where we target specific areas of the DNA and make many copies of them. And then during the last step, those different copies are detected. I then look at the data on a computer and determine the DNA profile.
And in reference to this case, which is lab number 21-02063, was a known standard submitted to your lab for analysis?
Yes.
And do you know where the known standard came from?
It was a saliva standard from Christine Ricci.
And once you obtained that saliva standard from Christine Ricci, what did you do with it?
So it went through that 4-step process. I then looked at the data on my computer and determined her DNA profile from that sample.
And what were the results of your testing?
I generated a single source DNA profile that could be used for a standard from Christine Ricci for comparison purposes.
Okay. And what happens after you generate a profile?
My work is done. My file is submitted for technical and administrative review, and then upon my file's closing, that profile can be used by whichever analyst is doing the analysis on the questioned items.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes?
Nothing further. Thank you, ma'am.
Any
questions.
questions? The witness may step down. Thank you very much. Good morning. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself to the jury, spelling your last name for the record?
My name is Lindsay Bird, and Bird is spelled B-I-R-D.
And where are you employed?
I'm a forensic scientist for the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab in the DNA unit.
And how long have you been with the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab?
Just over 12 years.
Have you been with the DNA unit that whole time?
I have.
What is your current capacity?
I'm a forensic scientist 3 within the DNA unit, which is a supervisory role over other forensic scientists doing day-to-day casework, and I'm also in charge of quality control for the DNA unit.
What is the duties and responsibilities of a forensic scientist 3?
So we assign and review casework from other analysts and do casework ourselves. And in my capacity as a quality control supervisor, I also ensure that the instrumentation and the reagents that we're using are all meeting our standards before we use them.
When did you become a forensic scientist number 3?
2 years ago.
And how long were you a forensic scientist number 2 for?
9 years, and then the first year I was a forensic scientist 1, which is a designation given to trainees.
What's your educational background, ma'am?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology from the University of New Hampshire, a Master of Science in Microbiology from the University of Hawaii, and a Master of Science in Forensic Science from the University of New Haven.
And do you have any specialized training in DNA?
I have.
That.
Prior to performing any casework, I was required to attend a training academy of sorts at the State Police Crime Lab that lasted for a period of about 1 year in order to meet the FBI's requirements to perform casework. And that included a literature review, working on mock cases and samples, observing, demonstrating all of our procedures, written and practical exams, and then it culminated in a final competency test.
And do you have any additional laboratory experience prior to working at the lab?
Prior to my position as a forensic scientist, I worked in the same unit as a contract employee where I did quality control tasks and research projects and functioned as a send-out technician.
And do you continue to do continuing education?
I do. We're required to do 8 hours of continuing education at a minimum per year.
Now, you mentioned competency tests. Did you just mention that?
I did.
And proficiency tests. What were your results most recently in those tests?
I have taken and passed all of them.
Now, how many samples have you performed a DNA analysis on in the lab?
At this point, well over 3,000.
And how many DNA cases have you done a comparative analysis on, if you know?
I don't know.
Is it
In the hundreds.
hundreds? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I want to direct your attention to this matter, which is lab number 21-02063. What was your role, ma'am?
For this case, I did data analysis and DNA interpretation for 4 items that were submitted to the DNA unit for DNA testing.
And what happens when you receive those items?
So we have a 4-step process that we do for all of our samples in the lab, and those samples are received from the criminalistics unit, and they undergo that 4-step process. And at the end, the data is interpreted and reported in DNA testing reports.
So what do you do?
For this case, I can do all of it, but for this case, I picked up where the data started. So once the lab work was complete, it was given to me to do the data interpretation and write the reports.
So you received the known DNA profile of Christine Ricci from Megan Little.
Correct.
And then you also received the YSDR profile of Michael Ricci generated by Madeline Richardson.
Correct.
You also received the SDR profile of Michael Ricci generated by Madison Frank.
That's correct.
So that's when you pick up your work.
Correct.
Okay. How do you do an interpretation of those DNA items?
So my interpretation begins with the evidence items, the questioned items, but we are trying to answer the question of who may have left this behind. So I will look at the items of evidence first, the profiles generated from them, interpret how many individuals they might be from, if they are interpretable, if there is a profile there to compare to, and then I can do a comparison to any of the known standards that we have submitted with the case.
So you received 4 items in total that you examined?
Correct.
And you take the question items and compare them to those 3 DNA samples?
Correct, if they are comparable, yes.
Okay. So I want to direct your attention to item 1-3.
Your Honor, may I refer to my report?
You may.
Thank you.
What was that?
So I looked at the profile for item 1-3.2.1, which was described as a sample of stain A on the blade of the knife recovered from the dining room floor at 679 Marine Street.
And what did you obtain from that item?
For item 1-3.2.1, the result was a male SCR DNA profile was obtained.
And what does that mean?
It means that the profile generated from that location on that item produced a profile that appeared to be from one individual.
And Ms. Bird, what is a contributor?
So DNA profiles can be from one person, and we would call that a single source profile, meaning the data indicates that it was deposited by one person. So one contributor, one person contributed this DNA to this place. Other profiles can be a mixture of more than one person's profile. So we can see that there may be 2, 3, 4 people contributing to that mixture profile, and then those would have more than one contributor contributing biological material to that location.
How many contributors were assumed on this matter, on this item?
This item was consuming one contributor.
Okay. Now, in regards to determining that, what did you do after?
Once I determined that, I did a comparison to the known standards that were available for the case.
And can you describe to the jury what you did, please?
So I compared that STR DNA profile from item 1-3.2.1 to the known profile from Michael Ricci and to the known profile from Christine Ricci.
In regards to Michael Ricci, what was the result?
The result was that the DNA profile from this item was at least 9.1 million times more likely if the profile originated from Michael Ricci than if it originated from an unknown individual unrelated to Michael Ricci. And this provides support for an inclusion.
What is inclusion?
So that means that when the evidence profile was compared to the known profile, they were found to be consistent, and then some statistical weight was applied to what that consistency means.
And that was 9.1 million?
Correct.
Do you know how many zeros that is?
And a million is a 1 with 30 zeros after it.
And what did you do after determining Michael Ricci, or using Michael Ricci's profile?
I then also did a comparison to Christine Ricci to the same profile.
And what was the result of that, ma'am?
That Christine Ricci is excluded from that DNA profile.
And what does excluded mean?
It means that when compared, the known standard profile taken from Christine Ricci is not consistent with the profile recovered from this item.
Okay. Now, anything else that you do with that item?
No.
Now, items, what were the next 2 items that you tested?
The next 2 items, the next 2 items that I interpreted were item 1-3.3.1, which is a sample from a handle of a knife recovered from the dining room floor at 679 Marine Street, and item 1-4.3.1, which was a sample taken from the handle of a knife recovered from the dining room table at 679 Marine Street.
What was the result of that?
For both of those items, the DNA profile is a mixture that is not suitable for comparison due to the quality of the profile.
And what does that mean?
It means that the recovered profile, while we could see it and there was a lot of information there, it was too low level and too complex to do anything with it. I could not compare it to anyone's known standard or do anything further with it.
Thank you. And then finally, item 3-10. What is that item?
The final item that I looked at was item 3-10.2.1, and this was described as a sample of stain A on the exterior left chest of the white t-shirt recovered from Christine Ricci.
And what was the, what profile did you locate?
For this sample, we generated a YSTR profile, and that profile was a mixture of at least 2 males.
And what is a YSTR DNA profile?
A Y profile is generated from testing that is specific only to male individuals. So in a DNA profile where there is a mixture of more than one person's DNA, if there's a large amount of female DNA and only a small amount of male DNA, using YSTR testing allows us to only look at DNA from the Y chromosome, which females do not have. So by using YSTR testing, we're able to pull out that male profile that otherwise would have been overwhelmed by the female DNA that's there.
In testing purposes, what's the difference?
All of the lab steps are mostly the same, except for the 3rd step when we're amplifying the samples. We will use slightly different chemicals that target only the Y chromosome and really negate all of the other DNA that's in there. At the end, all the other steps are the same, but the profile at the end is a little bit different.
And what's the importance of that?
The differences are important because they're considered to be patrilineal, meaning they are inherited through the Y chromosome down a family line. So an example would be a grandfather and a father and a son would all have the same YSTR profile as each other because it's inherited through the Y chromosome. And another example would be 2 brothers from the same father. They would also have the same Y profile as each other and as their father.
Now, you indicated that the YSTR DNA profile was a mixture of at least 2 male contributors. Mm-hmm. And then how do you separate the contributors? What types are there?
So for this case, or for this profile, I should say, there was what we call a major profile and a minor profile. When we recover the DNA profile, the contributors may contribute in different amounts. So a major profile is one that there's a lot of data there and it's very clear, and the minor profile is very low level trace amounts and really not enough to do any comparison or work with, but we can still use the major profile to compare to known standards.
And again, did you take the YSTR DNA profile from the questioned item and compare it to what?
I compared it to the Y profile standard for Michael Ricci.
And what was the results, ma'am?
That the major DNA profile is at least 174 times more likely if the profile originated from Michael Ricci or a patrilineal relative than if it originated from a randomly selected individual. 99.9% of the male population can be excluded from the major DNA profile.
What does that mean?
It means that when compared the profile recovered from item 3-10.2.1, the major portion of the profile, when compared to the known Y standard from Michael Ricci, they were found to be consistent with one another. And then I performed some statistical calculations to add some weight to what that consistency means.
And how did you perform those statistical calculations?
For the for the YSTRs, we use a database online that gives us some population statistics that we can plug into basically an online calculator in order to calculate what the likelihood is of seeing this profile if it did originate from the same source or if it didn't.
And what was that source, if you recall?
So my calculation is comparing the likelihood of seeing this profile if it originated from Michael Ricci or seeing it if it originated from somebody else.
And what was your conclusion?
That the major DNA profile was at least 170 times more likely if the profile originated from Michael Ricci than if it originated from a randomly selected individual who was not a patrilineal relative.
And I'm not sure if you would indicate this. What was the result of the minor profile?
The minor profile is not suitable for comparison. It was very low level, and there was really nothing that could be done with it.
Okay. What, if anything else, did you do in regards to analysis on this item?
That's the completion of it.
Now, are you subject to technical and administrative review?
Yes, I am.
Was that completed in this case?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Did you do anything further?
No, I did not.
May I have a moment?
You may.
Thank you, ma'am. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Any cross-examination?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Almost may call its next witness.
Taylor Federichuk, please.
Do solemnly swear that the testimony and evidence is before the jury and that are now from the Commonwealth and Senate Bar, the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God. Thank you, have a seat.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself to the jury, spelling your last name for the record?
My name is Taylor Federchuk, last name spelled Federchook.
And where are you employed, ma'am?
I'm employed at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory in the DNA unit.
In what capacity?
I'm a forensic scientist and a DNA analyst.
And how long have you been employed there for?
A little under 7 years.
Can you briefly describe your educational background, please?
I received a dual Bachelor of Science degree from West Virginia University in Forensic and Investigative Science and Biology. I then received my Master of Science degree from Boston University School of Medicine in Biomedical Forensic Science.
What is the nature of your work in your present position?
I'm a DNA analyst in the DNA unit where we process samples and generate reports and provide courtroom testimony.
Now, do you have any specialized training?
Yes, I do.
What's that?
Upon my hire to the lab, I went through an approximately 9-month training process where I did mock laboratory work, lectures, required readings, etc., to then take a competency test to be deemed competent in DNA analysis.
And what were the results of your most recent competency proficiency examinations?
I was deemed competent in DNA analysis and continually proficient in DNA analysis.
And does your lab follow policies and protocols for DNA?
Yes, we do.
Okay. And that's where's that policy and procedure come from?
We have protocols for each step in our process that are determined by the laboratory.
Okay. Now, I want to direct your attention to this matter, lab number 21-02063. What was your role, Ms. Federchuk?
I was the technical reviewer of DNA testing report 4.
Okay. And what is a technical reviewer?
All of our files go through a review process. The technical review is an independent review of the data by another analyst that is trained to do the review process, where we check for accurate and completeness of the results.
And in this particular matter, what did you review?
I reviewed the worksheets, the data interpretation, and the report for DNA testing report 4.
Now, you had the opportunity to review item 1-4.2?
Yes, that is correct.
And what was that item?
That item was sample of stain A on the blade of knife on the dining room table at 679 Moraine Street, I believe, sorry.
Now, why was this tested at a different time than the other items upon your review?
It depends when things are submitted, or in this case, this was an exhaustive sample that was tested later after authorization of exhausting that sample.
And once an item is deemed exhaustive, how does the lab accommodate to that?
There are either the exhaustive testing can be put forward or somebody can observe the testing as well.
And at some point, the exhaustive testing was put forward?
Yes.
Okay. Now, upon your review, what DNA profile was obtained from that item 1-4?
A male DNA profile was obtained.
And how many contributors were assumed?
We assumed one contributor.
Now, upon your independent review, what were your findings, ma'am?
The DNA profile from this item is at least 9.1 non-million times more likely if the DNA profile originated from Michael Ricci than if the profile originated from an unknown individual unrelated to Michael Ricci. This provides support for an inclusion, and Christine Ricci was excluded from this DNA profile.
And this was a STR profile.
Yes, that is correct.
And it's an inclusion of a fellow STR profile? Is that
Yes,
accurate?
that is correct.
Okay. And you indicated Christine Ricci is excluded?
Yes, that is correct.
All right. May I have a moment, Your Honor?
You may.
Nothing further. Thank you, ma'am.
Any cross-exam?
Yeah, just a moment. You mentioned that this particular testing was exhaustive,
Yes, that is correct.
and that means that this was one of those samples where there was quantity limited, correct?
Yes, at the beginning of the process, yes. But however, we had enough DNA in our testing to go forward with the four-step
You
process.
just didn't have enough DNA to save any portion of it for later testing, correct?
Of the original item swab itself, yes, that is correct.
Which indicates that there was a very small amount of DNA on this item.
Up front, before our quantification part of the testing, we don't know how much DNA, and certain samples are deemed quality possibly limited. In this case, there was a amount of DNA that was able to go forward, and there was still extract, or the volume that the DNA is eluted in is still available, yes.
This is through the amplification process,
Through the quantification process to know how much DNA we obtained from our sample.
which is post-amplification.
No, that is pre the amplification process.
Okay. Nothing further.
Any redirect?
No, thank you.
The witness may step down. Commonwealth calls Officer Hunt, please.
Right there, sir. Just a question.
Good morning. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony of the evidence, report from the jury, that are now mentioned in the Commonwealth and defendant's bars of the truth, will do none but the truth, so help you God? Thank you.
Good morning. You may proceed. Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
In a nice, loud, clear voice, could you introduce yourself to the jury and spell your last name for the record?
Yes, good morning. My name is Alexander Hunt. My last name is H-U-N-T.
Sir, where are you currently employed?
Marshfield Police Department.
In what capacity?
I'm a patrolman.
How long have you been employed by the Marshfield Police?
About 5 years.
Was that your first employment in law enforcement?
Yes.
And as a patrolman, what are some of your duties and responsibilities, sir?
I respond to emergency and non-emergency calls.
Drawing your attention, sir, to January 28th, 2021, were you working that day?
Yes, I was.
And as a patrolman?
Yes.
And what was your shift that you were working?
I was working at 4 p.m. to midnight shift.
And do you happen to remember the weather that day?
It was cold out. There was snow on the ground. I believe it was in the 30s.
And at approximately 4:48, sir, were you dispatched to a particular location?
Yes, I was dispatched to Marine Street.
And was that 679 Marine Street, if you recall?
Yes.
And what was the dispatch call for, sir?
It came in
Objection,
as
Your Honor, with regard to.
You can answer.
it came in as a medical 911 call saying that a male.
Objection, Your Honor.
It's a medical 911 call. Next question. And did you proceed to that location after getting the dispatch call, sir?
Yes, I did.
And approximately how long did it take you to respond to that location?
A few minutes.
And were you working alone or with a partner that day?
I was working with Officer Kelly.
Were you both in full uniform?
Yes.
In a marked cruiser?
Yes.
And who, if anyone else, arrived to 679 Marine Street roughly at the same time as you and Officer Kelly, sir?
Officer Chris Martin.
Were you three the first to arrive regarding first responders?
Yes.
And upon your arrival, can you describe your observations, sir?
When I arrived, the daughter was out front and she was pointing inside saying that her father had, he's the one having a medical emergency.
And specifically, where was she when you saw her, sir?
The daughter, she was outside in the driveway. She was pointing inside.
Was she alone?
Yes.
And how did she appear?
She was distraught. She was upset.
And upon entering the home, sir, what did you observe?
I saw Christine Ricci standing in the dining room, and then I saw Michael Ricci laying there on the floor.
And with regard to Michael Ricci, sir, could you describe how he was on the ground? In what position?
He was laying, his feet were towards Christine. He was laying face up. I think his leg might have been on like the staircase a little bit, but we kind of had to adjust him in order to provide CPR.
Fair to say he was on his back?
Yes.
Okay. And could you describe his physical appearance and condition?
He didn't have a pulse at the time. That's why we provided CPR.
What, if any, injuries did you observe on his person?
None at the time.
And what did you begin to treat him for?
I provided rescue breaths using an ambu bag, and Officer Kelly provided compressions.
And you indicated that the defendant, Christine Ricci, was standing near Michael Ricci. Is that correct?
Yes.
Specifically where?
She was standing a couple feet away from him, almost like facing him.
And what was her condition?
She was upset, distraught. I couldn't really make out what she was saying. I know Officer Martin was speaking with her at the time while me and Officer Kelly were providing CPR.
And it's fair to say your role was not speaking to the defendant, correct?
Yes.
What was your focus?
It's providing CPR.
And when you first arrived with Officer Kelly and Martin and began performing emergency measures, had anyone in the home already been trying to or attempting to do the same?
No.
Excuse me, Your Honor. Objection. I move to strike that.
I'll see you at the side of the bar. I have a clarifying question.
Thank you.
Officer Hunt, when you arrived in the Ricci home, did you observe anyone performing any life-saving measures at that time?
No, I did not.
And during the course of your treatment of Michael Ricci, where was Christine Ricci?
She was almost standing over him, kind of like, as I said, a few feet away. She was kind of in front of the stairs.
And at some point while you were performing emergency measures, did anyone else arrive?
Eventually, the paramedics arrived on scene.
And what was their role in relationship to your role when they arrived?
I was kind of in a tight spot, so I remained giving rescue breaths while one of the paramedics took over compressions for Officer Kelly.
And was there any kind of machine that was brought in to assist with the emergency assistance?
Yes, they ended up strapping on a compression machine to allow for automatic compressions.
And in setting up that machine, what, if anything, did you observe the paramedics do with Michael Ricci's shirt?
They ended up ripping up his shirt to get a clear, to get the machine on clear.
And in the course of doing so, what, if anything, drew your attention on the gloves of one of the paramedics, sir?
While the paramedic was giving compressions, he kind of looked at his hand and saw some blood on it. I looked at it too, and I didn't really realize. I thought it was another injury from him falling or something like that, to that nature.
And why in particular did that draw your attention?
Because at the time, the paramedic kind of stopped and just looked at his hand for a second, and then continued to do compressions and set up the machine. But we didn't know that there was another injury.
Objection, Your Honor.
All right. I'll strike that last portion. We didn't know there was another injury. And at some point, was Michael Ricci moved to another location?
Yes, they strapped him on a backboard and brought him down to the ambulance.
Did you assist in any way with this transport of Michael Ricci to the ambulance?
No, I did not. But one of the paramedics left a bag, so I brought the bag out to the paramedics.
And upon bringing the bag back to the paramedics, did you have a conversation at some point with anyone at the ambulance?
Yes, it was Lieutenant Smith.
And what, if anything, did he tell you, sir?
He informed me that there was a stab wound.
And was that the first time you had heard about a stab wound?
Yes.
When did Lieutenant Smith inform you of this in relation to when Michael Ricci was placed inside the ambulance?
He was already placed inside the ambulance. He was coming back up to inform us. And while I kind of met him like halfway up the driveway.
And what, if anything, did you do with this information that Lieutenant Smith provided?
Myself and Lieutenant Smith both went back up to the house and informed Officer Kelly and Officer Martin.
And at that point, what happened next?
Officer Kelly asked Christine Ricci who stabbed him.
And what did she say?
She said, "That's what I've been saying, there's blood. He's bipolar and schizophrenic."
And had you heard her say that before?
No.
What was her demeanor like?
She was upset, kind of distraught. At the time, we were going to take her up to the hospital.
What was the purpose of bringing, or the intention of bringing Miss Ricci to the hospital?
Because we thought it was a medical emergency, which it was. So instead of having her drive up there, we were going to transport her to, not allow her to be distraught and get into an accident on the way up there.
And prior to getting into that, what, if anything else, did Christine Ricci say had happened as it relates to the stab wound that was discovered?
She took a knife to defend herself and saying that Michael Ricci had lunged at her or had fallen on her.
And again, had you heard her mention anything along those lines when you had first arrived?
No, I did not.
And what, if any, knife was discovered while you were there, sir?
There was a knife on the ground. It was behind her. Michael was laying to the left side of the staircase. Christine was in front of the staircase, and the knife was behind her a few feet to the right of the staircase.
Had you previously seen the knife, sir?
No.
And what, if any, observations did you make of the knife once it was located?
It was like a black kitchen steak knife. There was no blood on it that I could see.
What, if anything, did Christine Ricci say about the stab wound to his back?
She did not say anything about it.
What, if anything, did Ms. Ricci say about a cut in addition
Objection,
to...
Your Honor.
Overruled.
Your Honor, there's no evidence that she was asked about these things.
I will see you at the side of the bench, counsel. Officer Hunt, at any time did you ask Christine Ricci about the stab wound to Michael Ricci's back?
I did not, personally.
Were you present when anyone else did?
No.
And had, based on your training and experience, sir, had you been responding to a stabbing, how, if any, how would that response have differed than what you just described as your response being when you first got there?
I would have applied direct pressure to the wound and attempt to stop the bleeding.
And you indicated that initially, Ms. Ricci, the plan was to take her to the hospital. Is that right?
Yes.
And why was that originally the plan?
Initially, because we thought he was having some.
Objection, Your Honor.
Ask the question differently. Sir, was the plan to take Ms. Ricci to the hospital when it was initially believed the situation was different with Michael Ricci?
Yes.
And then did the plan change as to where Ms. Ricci would go?
Yes.
Where did she go?
She came back to the Marshall Police Station.
And sir, at some point, was Sophia also taken somewhere?
Yes.
And where was that?
She was also taken to the station.
And once both Christine Ricci and Sophia Ricci were taken from the scene, what was your role as it relates to the scene?
I remained on scene to secure it, to make sure nobody entered or exited the scene.
May I have one moment, please? You may. Sir, one last question, just going back a few moments. When you testified about the paramedics, when they had hooked Michael Ricci up to the machine, the compression machine, that line of questioning, and you observed blood on the glove of one of the paramedics, may I just ask you a follow-up question about that?
Yes.
At any point, where, if anywhere, were you able to see where the blood was coming from?
We did not see. I didn't personally see where the blood was coming from. He had a couple lasers.
Objection.
You didn't see where it came from? Thank you.
May I inquire, Your Honor?
You may.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
You mentioned that when you arrived at 679 Moraine Street on January 28, 2021, you noticed a body of a male lying on the floor, correct?
Yes.
In a supine position,
Yes.
meaning his face was facing towards the ceiling, correct? And he was on his back.
Yes.
And his feet, you said, were on the staircase or near the stairs.
One of his legs might have been.
And just so we're clear, these were a couple of stairs that were between the sunken living room, dining room area and the kitchen area, correct?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that you saw blood on the hands of one of the paramedics while he was giving chest compressions, correct?
Yes.
So this would have been while his hands were on the front of Mr. Ricci's body doing chest compressions on his chest area?
Well, as you're doing CPR, you're supposed to give about 30 chest compressions, allow the person to give rescue breaths so that whoever's doing the chest compressions has to stop. So while he was stopping and I was giving the rescue breaths, he was looking at his hands.
So in other words, just want to make this clear, the compressions are on the front of his body.
Yes.
And that's when you noticed blood on his gloves for the first time.
Yes.
You said that when you first got to the scene, your primary focus, along with Officer Kelly, was to take care of the man on the floor.
Yes.
And you weren't paying particular attention to Christine Ricci except where she was standing.
Yes.
And it was really Christopher Martin, Officer Martin, who was talking to her.
Yes.
And you mentioned that she was very upset.
Yes.
And when you say upset, you mean she was crying, correct?
Yes.
She was hyperventilating?
Yes.
She was heaving?
Yes.
It was very difficult to understand what she was saying.
Yes.
And so you were focused on dealing with the medical issues and you weren't really paying attention to what she was saying.
Yes.
And you were leaving that task to Martin.
Yes.
And of course, she was saying a lot of things, but it was very highly emotional and it was difficult to understand.
Yes.
Now, when you arrived on the scene, you don't know whether Christine Ricci or Sophia Ricci at that point had done any life-saving measures before you got there, correct?
Not that I know of.
Right. All you know is when you walked in, everyone back was away from the body by, as you say, a feet or a couple feet.
Yes.
Giving you the appropriate space that you needed to work, correct?
Yes.
You said that when how did you put it? When Lieutenant Smith comes in and mentions the puncture wound, you're there when Officer Kelly asks again about, or asks Christine Ricci a question?
When I went out to give a medical bag to the paramedics that they left inside, Lieutenant Smith met me halfway and informed me of the wound, and he came in along to speak with Officer Kelly.
And Officer Kelly directed a question to Ms. Ricci at that point, right?
Yes.
And she began her statement with, "That's what I've been telling you."
Yes.
Right? Does the grammar of that clause suggest that she had said something about it before?
Objection. You can answer.
Yes, it could be.
Right. And again, it was Christopher Martin who was spending the time talking to her before when she was so upset while you guys were working the body, right? At some point also, she says, in describing how it all went down, she mentions that he fell on her. Is that what you remember?
Something to that nature, yes.
Okay. Nothing further.
Redirect. Very briefly. Sir, defense counsel just said defendant Christine Ricci, when you first arrived, she was upset, hyperventilating, heaving, correct?
Yes.
And she was, as you said, a bit difficult to understand. Is that right?
Yes.
And then he said she was saying a lot. Was she, in fact, saying a lot?
No, not that I heard.
What was she doing?
She was kind of just crying, mostly, from what I could hear.
Do you hear any actual words you could decipher besides the tears and the hyperventilating?
No.
Did you ever hear the word knife until Lieutenant Smith asked about the stabbing?
Objection, Your Honor. He said he wasn't listening to what she said.
Overruled.
No, I did not.
Thank you. Recross.
Yes. Sir, it was Christopher Martin that was paying attention to what Ms. Ricci was saying, correct?
He was speaking with her, yes.
Right. You were paying attention to taking care of the man on the floor.
Yes, my main focus was providing CPR.
Right. And you don't really know what Ms. Ricci said to Officer Martin, do you?
I did not hear anything.
Right. Thank you. Nothing further.
The witness may step down.
Thank you.
So, jurors, now might be a time to take our morning break. It's a little bit past the 11 o'clock hour, but you didn't come out quite on time this morning, so I'll give you your morning break.
As for jurors, is placing notebooks in the chair and exit this way.
Let's talk about Mr. Dillon. What's the commonwealth's proffer of what? Well, you've had some conversations, as I understand it, over the weekend, and as I understand it, you didn't reach much common ground with regard to that. So,
maybe I can frame what the issue is, just if they are not aware of what my problem with Mr. Dillon's testimony is.
Sorry, just to interrupt. We did communicate not about Mr. Dillon. I was not presented with any information as to his questions.
all right, I appreciate that clarification. So, do you think if you talk now about Mr. Dillon, that we're going to remove some of the issues from the plate?
Well, let me explain what my issue is.
Who is Mr. Dillon?
Mr. Dillon is Michael Ricci's boss for the last 5 years prior to his death. He is the district fire chief at the time in Boston. And
Is he the individual that he was driving around?
Yes. And so the portions of the testimony that I find objectionable are throughout every time that he's testified, for example, at grand jury, as I'm sure Your Honor remembers, he offered testimony about, the fact that they only accept stable people in that role, that he never saw, that he didn't think that Michael had any mental illness, that they have to have very good reputation, that they directly work with you, have to maintain physical and mental stability and all of this stuff, which Michael Dillon is not in a position to testify to. He can testify to his observations, I agree, but not this trying to sort of do character evidence, character bolstering as a way of saying, oh, well, he, must not have had any mental illness because Michael Dillon, who he drove around, says that he wouldn't have picked someone like that who in such a position. So I think that's objectionable, that portion of his proffered testimony. And then we're also renewing our objection, of course, with regard to the prior bad acts. Particularly, and there's also a statement about Michael's estrangement from his family, and that I think is also objectionable. It's clearly learned through hearsay information and shouldn't come in. There's putting in 2 black eyes. Who's that?
Yes.
Your Honor, with regard to the very last thing defense counsel said, we do not intend to ask Michael Dillon anything about what he was told from Michael Ricci about his family or anything like that. So
Consistent with my order, right?
Right, exactly. Per your order, what I have gauged from it is that Michael Dillon can testify to his observations of the alleged victim's physical condition and cannot testify about the alleged victim's comments about the defendant's temper. So we understand loud and clear your rulings. As it relates to what defense counsel is now bringing up, had defense counsel not made the alleged victim's kind of mental health, intoxication, all of that kind of an issue, if you will, and raised it for the jury to consider, I would argue then perhaps this testimony would not be attempted to be elicited. But this is an individual, Michael Dillon, who spent more time with the alleged victim up until his death than virtually anyone else. He chose him, handpicked him to drive him because of how responsible he was, how and then during grand jury he was asked, did you have any concerns about his mental health, any concerns about his his drinking habits, anything like that? Would you have had somebody be your aide driving around the fire chief, if those were issues? And he indicated absolutely not. He did not. So we don't intend to spend a long time on that. What we anticipate is he would testify to their relationship and the observations per your order, Your Honor. For example, we would ask how important is an aide's physical and mental stability. And whether or not he was handpicked. And then
And he was handpicked by Mr. Dillon himself to have this job?
Yes. And then he worked with him right up until the Friday before his death, the same day that Michael Ricci Jr. is expected to testify. He went in to speak to his father. He would also testify, Your Honor, that he developed a friendship with him because of his working relationship. And he would talk about basically the injuries he observed at different junctures, Your Honor, one of which, well, I don't need to repeat this. This was all in your
the
order,
prior
Your Honor. And the last injury he observed was 1 week prior to his death. And those were scratches on his neck. That's essentially, it's very quick. I would intend to ask him if he was ever had any concerns about Mr. Michael Ricci's drinking or any concerns about his behavior, including did he ever come to work smelling like booze?
So observations is different than any concerns. The question needs to be phrased by his observations. Did you ever observe him? Did you ever smell anything? Did you ever, those kinds of observations, what he saw, what he heard. Well, not what he heard with the limitations that I've previously given you, but those observations are fair game. Equally, it seems to me, he made the decision to hire this man for this job. The criteria that he used in deciding that he was an acceptable and the person he wanted to pick for this job is relevant to the jury's decision-making in light of the issues that have been raised with regard to the alleged victims' intoxication or capabilities. And those observations are just that. The jury's going to have to draw whatever inferences they think are reasonable from those observations, but the observations themselves are fair game.
What about the statement, we picked him for his mental stability? That's a conclusion.
No. He can go through the criteria that he used to select the candidate and to select Mr. Ricci and his observations of Mr. Ricci as he worked with him day to day. And then the prior restrictions that I put on the prior bad act still stand, of course.
Thank you.
All right. So next in order is McDonald, Benson,
Michael Dillon.
and then Dillon. Okay. Do we think we're going to get to McDonald before the break?
Which McDonald?
Before the lunch break? Are you referring to Mark McDonald or Trooper McDonald?
I meant Mark McDonald.
No.
I don't think so. I think that's going to be post-lunch hour, Your Honor.
All right. So address with me whatever additional items you want to that aren't covered by my order before we get to that individual. All right. Have a good break.
All right.